On blast.
This is the On Blast Podcast, NFL Picks Edition. We are here. It's playoff time. 18 weeks behind us. The playoffs are finally here. It seems like just yesterday that we started on this journey with so many weeks ahead, so many picks to be made, so many games. And now we're here. It's the playoffs. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I mean, last time we talked, I discussed how much I despised week 18. And look at here, week 18, not so bad after all. We'll get to that in a sec. But first, I got to introduce the man, the myth, the legend that is here to give us all the whole grain goodness that he always provides, the information and education. Our guy, Mr. Matt Russell. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good, man. I don't know what 18-week season you just lived through, but it felt like a lot longer than you described it. At least it did for me.
I was trying to put a positive spin on things, okay? Trying to put a positive spin. We're in the playoffs. We're hype. We're starting the pod. You know,
Totally.
Got to come with some energy off the front end.
Absolutely, man. And listen, nobody loves the NFL season more than me. But that being said, like, you remember early September, because that seems like it was a really, really long time ago. Again, at least in my world. This is obviously the time of year where, you know, I don't get a ton of time off necessarily by design. Get ourselves here. I signed up for all of this. Yeah, man, but fired up.
Last week, 12-4 record in week 18, bringing the grand total for the regular season to 153, 108, and 10 on the season. Most successful season had on the pod in a lot of ways. Listenership up on the pod, viewership up on the pod, the record up on the pod. Things are just going well this season, and we continue to keep that train moving into the playoffs as well. And we are here, wild card weekend, or as they call it, super wild card weekend. And for people who might be new to the pod, just a reminder of what we do here. I'll come out, I'll give a pick, we'll lean on one side or the other, say why I'm thinking this team or the other, and then Matt comes in with the information and education that lets you know where the line is, where it was, and where it could be going before we get to kickoff, all that other fun stuff to hopefully have you come out on the other end with a more informed pick. That's all we're trying to do here. And clicking at a high rate, I'll take that all season long. But before we start with the picks on what they call now Super Wild Card Weekend, I remember, I don't even have to go back and listen to last year's pod, but I remember pleading with myself, pleading with you as well, pleading with the audience to remind me this season on Super Wild Card Weekend. This is the lesson. Blowouts do happen. Normally in the playoffs, I know I'm going to be out here trying to take the points wherever I can get them because it's the playoffs. But this Super Wild Card Weekend stuff, it's not about close games at all. So I'm just going to quickly here remind people of what the scores were from last year's games on Super Wild Card Weekend. Okay. The Bengals 26, Raiders 19. The Buffalo Bills 47, the Patriots 17. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers 31 versus the Eagles 15. The Niners 23-17, which was an upset, right? The Niners were underdogs in that game.
Who were they playing?
The Cowboys.
Oh, yeah,
the Cowboys.
Of course. Yeah.
Niners 23, Cowboys 17. Then you had the Chiefs 42-21 against the Steelers. And on the Monday night, you had the Rams. Yeah, it wasn't even that close. 42-21 made it look a lot better. I think I remember last year talking about trying to watch Euphoria. The game being over in time to watch the Euphoria live, if I remember correctly, that Sunday night game. And then on Monday night, we had the Rams and Cardinals. Rams won 34-11.
Yeah.
So again, just a reminder before we get into any of these games, don't be afraid of the big spreads. Now, that's just what we're saying going in. Now we will deep dive into each and every game, but that is just a reminder that I promise to remind myself and thus you, the audience, as well as we head into this Super Wild Card Weekend. And we begin on Saturday. We got the Seahawks at the San Francisco 49ers. Niners favored by 10 points. I know, as I've been taught by my guy, Mr. Matt Russell, 10 is a very key number It is a lot of points to be laying with a rookie quarterback in the playoffs. But here we are. A reminder, don't be afraid of the blowouts. I love the Niners defense. My man Purdy hasn't been making a lot of mistakes. My man Geno Smith, kind of tailed off towards the end of the season. But I just think the Niners defense in this instance, the games that they've played so far, Niners kind of dominated that. It's going to be tough to beat a team again, convincingly, for the third time. But I just can't take the Seahawks in this. Give me the Niners. I'll lay the 10 points and just full on root for my Niners here.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to be pleased because there's a lot of 9.5s out there on the board. So, and I think that just kind of reflects the idea, as you mentioned, right? 10 being a relatively key number, especially when it gets down to the idea of, insurance points, right? Teams are more likely, especially in the playoffs, to just take that field goal when they're up 7 points just to get to 10. So it becomes that, that sort of percentage points more of a key number. But I'm with you here. And it comes down defensively to the fact that we've watched these two teams play. The Seahawks took basically do some quick math in my head here, 116 minutes of NFL football play before they scored an offensive touchdown against the Niners defense. Because people forget, they'll look at the score real quick, not that it was overly flattering to the Seahawks from that week 2 game, and they see 7 points on the board, and they go, at least the Seahawks scored a point. No, that was off of a blocked field goal. That was a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. I think maybe the only one of those all season long. I don't remember another blocked field goal return for touchdown off the top of my head. I'm sure there probably was one. And then, of course, they meet back in Seattle in a game that I liked Seattle in. That was a time where Brock Purdy was on a short week. He was playing his first ever road start. We talked about the script after that game really working out and then him not playing particularly well on the back end of that. But again, the defense was outstanding in that game, right? Turning the Seahawks over. Now the Seahawks come into this game and they don't have Jordan Brooks defensively. So as much as the 49ers were running it, and Chris McCaffrey obviously only in one of these 2 games, the most recent one, of course, he's going to be able to run it. Elijah Mitchell is back, so he's going to be able to run the football here. Again, obviously San Francisco back at home. The last 3 weeks, their scores are 37, 37, and 38. They are not exactly putting up, a small amount of points here. So how many points is Seattle going to need to be able to cover this game? I'm looking at something like 27-16 type of a score here. And again, that feels kind of very generous to Seattle offensively, and also very generous to Seattle defensively. And I understand why this number is what it is. From a market standpoint, San Francisco -8 is the number that I come out to, which is probably why it opened around there. It opened around 8.5, actually opened in some, very low limit book. Actually, I think it opened 7, something along those lines. And people were, knocking the women and children out of the way in order to grab San Francisco -7. So the earliest I could get was 8.5. So I'm in at 8.5 here. My own personal ratings make it 9.5. So that's why I automatically sort of felt like there was value on San Francisco, but certainly at 8.5. Now my ratings would say that this is a fair number. So, again, there's not going to be a ton of value from a number perspective. And a lot of people are going to like the 49ers, and it's going to feel sort of like the square thing to do. But like you mentioned, by reeling off a lot of those blowouts, and a lot of those blowouts were the favorite, right? That had a lot of sort of public money and all the sort of terms that we like to use. I think there's some other spots where people are going to get tripped up throughout the week. And so if you're willing to lay 9.5, I think you're probably going to start the week with a pretty, with a win. Whether you're going to be able to keep that money the rest of the weekend is a completely different story. But yeah, man, San Francisco -9.5, widely available. Make that 9. I want you to change that on the font because I don't want you coming to me when they win by 10. I don't want you to say that you pushed in that first game because you're getting 9. You're giving up 9.5. You're getting that win. This is 49ers in a big way, I think.
I like it. I like it a lot. Niners, let's roll for sure. We are moving on to the Chargers. 2-point favorites against the Jags. We're sticking here. This is Saturday night, baby, in Duval. Let's go. I want to say when I first saw this line, it was a pick'em. I know you will correct me if I'm wrong for sure, which I appreciate gladly. Line appears to have moved towards the Chargers, and under a field goal, I'm still very comfortable in taking the Chargers in this game. The Jags, I mean, this is a prime spot where I could see where I like taking the Jags as underdogs, but I need them to be bigger underdogs. I would like them to be 3-point underdogs. I would like them to be 3.5-point underdogs. And we're not really there yet. I do want to know. I'm on the Chargers. I'll lay the 2 points. But I'll be a lot more confident if you can tell me for sure that Mike Williams will play in this game after Brandon Staley. Like,
Dude.
I don't even know what my guy was on last week in week 18. I know I have my feelings about week 18, and clearly he does as well, as he decides, you know what? My often injured team, I'm going to play them in a game that doesn't matter at all.
Yeah,
So give me the Chargers, but tell me some injury good news, please.
Well, listen, who knows with the Chargers when it comes to good news, bad news in that department. And that's the problem, right? And so longtime listeners will be sort of happy to know, if they hadn't figured it out by my rants on Twitter, as I had sort of this small the gross domestic product of a small country riding on the Broncos to win that game against the Chargers after everything that was sort of tied into it throughout the course of week 18. I renounce Brandon Staley. I'm out. I'm out on Brandon Staley.
Wow.
I'm out. Right? I like generally the concept of aggression. I like the general concept of going for it on fourth down. So when he was doing that last year with a terrible defense, I was like, yes. But when you tell me that you don't know how to manage a roster where you can't take out, 5, 7 guys, like, this isn't complicated. It's not like we don't see this every week 18. So I'm sorry, there's no excuse for Herbert even playing a snap in that game. What happens if Austin Eckler gets hurt? Do you have to forfeit the game? When Mike Williams leaves the game, do they say to the referees, sorry, guys, we have to shut this game down. We don't have enough players? No, somebody else goes out there. Look at all these other teams. Like the Giants are literally in the exact same spot with the sealed up wild card, seed and all of that sort of thing. They can figure it out. So fundamentally, you look and you go, am I supposed to trust that organization, or am I supposed to trust the organization of Doug Peterson and the Jaguars? Now, the Jaguars part of it's a bit sketchy, certainly, but at least Doug Peterson has sort of a handle on things, and that's a team that I'm going to like a lot more over the course of time. And so all that is to say, I don't really have a side in this game. The line opened 2.5. I knew that was a little high, so I grabbed Jacksonville plus 2.5 at even money, thinking like, well, maybe I can come back on the Chargers if this thing gets down lower. And sure enough, it did. Like you said, but when you looked at it, it was pick'em. And it's been pick'em for a really long time this week. I think Monday through Wednesday, basically. And now we're sitting here on Thursday, and it's back up to 2.5 now. And I start going, are we going to get to 3? Are we going to get to that point that I don't think anybody, certainly even yesterday, thought that we were going to get, where the Jags were going to, at home underdogs plus 3? Like, what's going on here? Anyway, so I don't have a side in this game. And this is going to send up the sort of, red flags and the alarms, because I absolutely got housed in our weekly total this season, which isn't rare because I'm awful at totals. Again, longtime listeners will understand and know that. And honestly, not a lot of it is bad handicap. Some of it is sort of bad luck. But anyway, I digress. I say all that to say, I like the under in this game. I think the Jaguars defense has been playing a lot better in the last 2 months. Trevor Lawrence gets a lot of credit for playing a lot better in the last 2 months, right? We all sort of talk about like how he's, how much better he's been since the bye week and the London game, and how it's starting to click for him. I didn't love how he played under the bright lights, right? That was a playoff game on Saturday night, and he missed some wide open throws. And there wasn't, I didn't love that necessarily. I think they're going to run the ball a lot more, because that's what you do against the Chargers. Travis Etienne is pretty fresh right now. He's had a single-digit carries the last 2 weeks. Chargers, obviously a different story, right? One of the worst defenses in the league, can be beaten explosively. James Robinson, remember him, had a 50-yard run in that game the first time around in week 3. That's going to be more Travis Etienne in this. So I think with the Jags running the football more, takes a little more off the clock, et cetera, et cetera. The Jags run defense, pretty good. Chargers run game, pretty bad. This is going to be on the shoulders of Herbert and Lawrence. But if we sort of think that even as good as these guys are, or as potentially good as these guys are, if we think that these first-time quarterbacks in the playoffs might struggle as sort of a general rule, if they struggle against each other, and I don't know that they're going to turn the ball over, right? It might just be missed throws and that sort of thing. I think 47.5 is a little high. I think people will look at this, especially come Saturday, and be like, oh, Lawrence, Herbert, shootout, like these two, getting after it. But the Chargers defense has played pretty well, right? Think of that game against Miami and Tua, where they had the game plan, right? They looked at what Tua does, another young quarterback, and they go, okay, like what can we do to take away what he wants to do? So I think the Chargers defense does that. And so between the Jags defense playing a little bit better here, the Chargers defense playing a little better, and two young quarterbacks, albeit very good quarterbacks, and sort of an increased number, I think it gets to 48. You can get under 48 right now at minus 120. Why is that important? Because 48 kind of a key number when it comes to totals, right? You can sort of picture a 28-20 type of a game. So we'll wait and see if we can get 48. At the worst case, theoretically, we'd grab minus 120 at under 48. I promise you it's my only game total for the playoffs. Not every game I'm going to like a side, because think about it, right? 16 games in a regular week, or at least a full-scale regular week. How many do I really like? 8, 9, something along those lines, as far as like making a pick that I'm like trying to talk you in or out of. So I'm not going to talk you out of this one. I've got Chargers 25-1 to win the AFC tickets out there. So like I'm hoping they win. I got like I said, the initial opening bet on Jags plus 2.5. If the Chargers do their thing where they play a really close game, maybe they win by 1. That would be ideal, or obviously 2 points I would take as well. But, for this game, I think the best bet is on the under, but we can wait and probably get a better price on this, I think.
No, I got you. Makes a lot of sense. In terms of trying to get a good price, this line has been moving and shaking for a while here. Got the Dolphins at the Bills. Bills favored by 13 points. No Tua. No Teddy Two Gloves. We saw the scenes last week in Buffalo. Super emotional game, emotional start with the kick return TD. And at under 2 touchdowns, can't lie to you, I'm still okay with taking the Buffalo Bills, especially when you're telling me that the Dolphins are rolling out Skylar Thompson. This line, though, the movement has just been insane. And this, to me, is the lesson that we've been talking about for a while that you've educated our listeners on in terms of paying attention to the lines. This was 9.5, 2 days ago when there was talk of will Tua play? We're not really sure, but we knew Tua wasn't going to play, right?
The rating for the Dolphins from sort of a numeric standpoint, right? Normally kind of in the high 50s with Tua, mid to high 50s, low 40s, again, as favorites against the Jets. And that was with Skylar Thompson. And so if you take that and you go, okay, well, we're taking that Skylar Thompson rating. They won the game. God knows it wasn't pretty, theoretically 9-6, but 11-6 on the scoreboard. And you take that and you apply that to this game, you get that 11-point spread, which is where this sort of opened up. 10.5, 11 was where it was at the start of the week. And then there was this weird day of murmuring, I think it was on Tuesday, where it was like Tua might play. Because if Tua plays, like we know what this line should-ish be, because these teams played like 3 weeks ago in Buffalo, right? In what we thought was going to be a snowstorm, and the Bills were -7. And they opened -6, -6.5, only because of the snow that we thought we were going to get. Did this even get to 7? So you go, okay, if Tua plays, knowing there's obviously uncertainty on whether he can even survive the game and all that sort of thing, like probably not getting all the way back down to 7. We're probably getting somewhere like 8. So they make it 9 because, 9 is kind of a dead number, right? 9.5. And then it's like immediately within sort of 12 hours, it's like, nope, Tua is not playing. And we're getting Skylar Thompson ready to start. And now we're up to 13. And so I don't, sort of to your point, like I don't really know why we are up to 13 other than just the general concept of like, it's a playoff game. Skylar Thompson's a first-time quarterback and blah, blah, blah. Because just numerically or sort of like ratings-wise, 11 seemed fine to me with Skylar Thompson. And then there's the element that you mentioned, right? 2 kick return touchdowns by the Bills last week. This is a team that's just felt underwhelming all sort of season long here. Every time I watch them, I'm like, okay, like, come on. Like, where is this? And then in the fourth quarter, I think it was both were in the fourth quarter. One might have been third, one might have been fourth. They hit these bomb touchdowns, right? Where it's like, dude, a 50-yard touchdown, like guy, the John Browns of the world, like making diving touchdown catches. And like, you go like, yeah, that's what people like about Buffalo, right? Is that Josh Allen can just absolutely sling it. But when it's not Josh Allen slinging it, and it's not Josh Allen kind of taking off and running, there's just, again, it's all just kind of underwhelming because they still win the game. So let us say, like, I really want to fade Buffalo. And again, this is one of these bummer games that would be so much more interesting if this was Dolphins Bills at each team's finest, or sort of, at least with Tua. And so I go, like, I can't lay the 13 points, but I definitely don't really want to take the 13 points with Skylar Thompson.
Yeah.
So, like, how am I going to bet this game? Like, what do I think can happen? And I go, I kind of think the over is the play because I want to fade Buffalo's defense conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a way that Buffalo scores a lot of points, though. So, again, fading Buffalo's defense doesn't necessarily mean they don't cover. Because what if they win this game 31-14, 31-17, something along those lines, right? Like, that's probably good enough most of the time, but not in this case. So I like the team total. I like Buffalo, and I wrote about this for the Score a couple of days ago. And it was, what happened was when Tua went out, the total came down, which sort of shrunk the scores, even though it probably only should have shrunk Miami's score. So they're available at 27.5. They're still pretty widely available. There's some 27. I mean, listen, you can bet anything for a certain price. If you can find like minus 120 at 27.5, you take that. You can find better than minus 120 at over 28. So you get a push on 28 with the Bills. But that's how I want to play this, because I want to bet on the Bills scoring, because I think, and again, this is the assumption of rational coaching, which is always a little bit terrifying. I think the Bills, if they spread everything out and they just go, you know what, like guard five receivers with the Dolphins secondary, the Dolphins defense, I think they can just have like Josh Allen in pretty good conditions on Sunday afternoon. I think he can just pick this team apart. And so I think they score one way or another. There could be a defensive touchdown here because Skylar Thompson gets a little loose with the football. Obviously, from a special team standpoint, they're at least capable. And then I think offensively, there could be a spread it out mentality here with the Bills, where they're not worried about having a quick drive and having the Dolphins burn them for that, because I think they're going to get a lot more possessions, because I think the Dolphins are going to give them more than 10 or 11 possessions. I think the Bills could have 12 or 13 possessions in this game, which to me makes their team total a lot more palatable, right? It's a lot easier to cover that 28, sort of 4 touchdown number when you have that many, right? We just saw Georgia hang 65 on TCU because they kept getting the ball back, right? They kept getting extra possessions. I think that's kind of where we're headed here. So I don't trust Buffalo to lay the 13 necessarily. But again, I'm not going to be betting on Miami unless it got to like 14 or 14.5. That's a little sketchy. And maybe there's a spot live one way or another, right? Maybe Miami gets an early touchdown somehow, or Buffalo gets an early touchdown or two, and you get that situation where it feels like Buffalo is going to blow them out. And maybe they do, but you're getting like plus 21 or something along those lines. So maybe a live betting situation here once we see what Miami's actually capable of.
Yeah, totally understand there. Interested to see definitely the scenes in Buffalo for a second straight week for sure. Let's move on to the Giants at the Vikings. A lot of people kind of eyeing this one as maybe the most interesting line, as we talked about a lot of blowouts so far. But we got the Giants at the Vikings. Vikings favored by 3 points at home. Both of these teams I found super annoying betting on one way or the other, just like untrustworthy teams, or you don't like betting on them or laying points on them, essentially. And the Vikings were super frustrating. And I can't remember a time being comfortable laying 3 points with the Vikings at any point throughout this season. And so I can't feel comfortable laying 3 points with the Vikings in the playoffs. With that said, I still have a tough time here taking the Giants. And to be honest, I'm taking the Giants just because it's hitting that number at 3. I just feel the Giants might be able to keep it close. Give me Dayball, running the ball, Danny Dimes, Saquon, all that fun stuff, all those trick plays, and their weird offense that they've been doing the whole year that kind of just kept things together somehow. You don't really know how they've been doing it. Against any other team, I think the Giants would just get blown out. But the Vikings are just so strange to me. I can't lay 3 points with the Vikings. I just can't do it. Give me the Giants plus 3.
Yeah, it's funny. You hit the nail on the head, right? They were frustrating for 2 different reasons, because when Minnesota wins that first game of the season against Green Bay, and it's sort of like, one game confirms all the suspicions about the Vikings, the positive suspicions that they had, right? That we had, right? That like, oh, once you get Zimmer out of here, like now the Vikings are going to get cooking and it's going to be great. And look, they just blew out the Packers and now like we're off and running. And then they get blown out by the Eagles, but we're still like, no, they keep winning all the other games, right? It's like, what, they were like 8-1, 9-1, something along those lines. And so you look at the scores and you look at or especially you look at the standings and you go, like, yeah, I should be betting on the Vikings. They're 9-1, they're 10-2, they're this, that, or and like they just like never cover these numbers. And when they did cover, right, like think about the Jets home game, right, where it's like just sneak Mike White, for God's sake, sneak Mike White, and they don't do it. And the Vikings end up winning and covering that game where nobody sort of felt good about the Vikings. They didn't cover another game the rest of the season until the Bears rolled over for them last week in a successful attempt to get the number 1 draft pick. And so even when it looked good for the Vikings, it was like somehow they pulled off not covering. Exact opposite with the Giants. Never particularly looked good, but we're always covering because the Vikings, perception was here. Their rating sort of slowly went towards the middle, whereas the Giants' perception started down here and slowly moved up to the middle. And it's funny because when these two teams met a few weeks ago, it was 4.5, this line, right? And so you can see, and honestly, if it had been 4 weeks before that, probably would have been 6.5. And if it was 4 weeks before that, it probably would have been 8.5. You know what I mean? So it's just been this like slow thing of these like two trains eventually meeting. And now they meet at essentially the same, right? They are basically rated the same. The Vikings here probably going to have some of the best home field advantage sort of built into the marketplace, certainly 2.5 points, maybe even 3. And I think that 3 element is the key, literally the key number, and why I'm taking the Giants too. Now, listen, a lot of people are going to take the Giants, and we're going to sort of probably feel dumb when we all line up on the same underdog, and like, that very rarely goes well. But I went into this, part of my job, part of the best part of my job, and, I have a really good season this year, is because I have to actually make a case for one side or the other. And so when I came into this game, I was kind of like, man, like it was 4.5 a few weeks ago. The Vikings were up 8 points late in that game, right? You'll remember the Giants went and scored late on a Barkley run and then got the 2-point conversion. The 2-point conversion, honestly, if they had missed it, the Giants would have covered anyway. So that part didn't really matter. And I'm looking through like box scores and the season long and all the metric stuff. And like Daniel Jones has had over 220 yards twice this season, which is to your point about like, if it seems like it's anybody else, they're probably going to get blown out. Now, whether they would or should or could or will, like that's a pretty obvious sort of thing. And one of those 2 big yardage games for Daniel Jones was against, I believe, the Lions, when the Lions had a big lead. So a lot of it was sort of second half, like having to come back, sort of game script type situation. So the only time we're in kind of a neutral game script where Daniel Jones was able to have his way was indoors at Minnesota. So you're right. It's like, yeah, if it was anybody else, whether they've got blown out or not, if it was anybody else, I wouldn't expect much from Daniel Jones, and that may or may not lead to a blowout. In this case, I think we can expect things from Daniel Jones because every quarterback does this against the Vikings, right? Like the numbers, it's not like we're making this stuff up, right? Like the pass defense numbers are terrible. I'm with you, man. Like I would have loved to be able to sit here and make a case about like, yeah, we've gone too far with this line. And honestly, if it had gone to like 2.5, I probably would have. But we're still getting 3s. There's some even money plus 3s out there, or even some short juiced 3s. Yeah, I'm going to kick myself less. And honestly, sometimes it comes down to like organizational, right? Like, and Vikings fans know this. If you're betting the Vikings in the playoffs, probably not a great idea. But the Giants are the organization who sort of pull off the upsets, right? They're the ones who end up with Eli Manning having 2 Super Bowl rings on, 9-7 type football teams. So yeah, all of those guys are gone, but like Brian Daboll's certainly capable. And Daniel Jones, I think, is certainly capable. Honestly, I kind of like him more than I do Kirk Cousins. And yeah, it's not a primetime game necessarily, but talk to me at 6 o'clock, 6:30 on Sunday Eastern time, when Kirk Cousins is throwing that interception, whether he doesn't feel like he's in prime time in a wild card game at home. Like I think the pressure is going to be on. So I just think, you look at it and you're like, Kirk Cousins is going to make stuff look difficult. and the Giants and Brian Daboll are going to make stuff look easier for Daniel Jones. And when we're getting 3 points in a game that I think is close, I'm going to take the Giants.
I like it a lot. Moving on to the Ravens at the Bengals. Bengals favored by 8.5 points at home. For the Ravens, no Lamar Jackson, as well, we're assuming no Lamar Jackson, as everything that we're hearing to date is he's basically a long shot to play at this point as we're recording this. But, this 8.5 number is very weird. Seems like too many points. But then again, I'm going to remind myself, don't be afraid of the big time spreads. And also, don't be afraid of Tyler Huntley, right? Especially when the other side of this is, in addition to Lamar Jackson not practicing on Wednesday, Tyler Huntley didn't throw a pass during the media viewing of Wednesday's practice due to tendonitis in his right shoulder. Mm-hmm. So now not only am I talking about laying 8.5 points against no Lamar Jackson, but also a banged up Tyler Huntley. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that, but either way, like, didn't throw in front of the media doesn't mean he didn't practice.
Of course.
Cool. But I'm going to lay the 8.5 points with the Bengals here. And yeah, just super wild card weekend. I guess I'll go back and look at the scores that I read at the top of the pod and just talk myself into being comfortable with laying the 8.5 points here. Not liking it, not feeling good about it,
right?
But super wild card weekend. Let's go.
Okay. So totally supportive of San Francisco laying those points. Very neutral on Miami or Buffalo laying those points against Miami. Vigorously against laying the points with Cincinnati in this case for a couple of different reasons. So from a line perspective, right, we know it's not Lamar. Follow the money, right? Like, the number should be 4 if it was Lamar. Think about it this way, right? Their first matchup when everybody was healthy was in Baltimore. Ravens were favored by 3. Right?
Yeah.
Even if you want to do the full switch of 3 one way and 3 the other way, you got Cincinnati -3. I'll even throw another point your way to get you to 4 on Cincinnati. But it wasn't. It was opened at 6. And that's the standard. Is Lamar going to play? Is he not going to play number, right? Well, now it's 8.5. Now, as we're literally speaking, this morning it was 8.5. As we're speaking, 9. I want to see how high this can go. So I'm not saying run out to the streets right now and bet Baltimore. I am going to be betting on Baltimore, though, now that we are talking about 8.5. Now, I'm somebody who wrote about the Bengals as a teaser piece because a couple of different things. 1, it was 6.5 at the time. We were on the way up. 2, we had a little more ways to go for it to still be a valuable teaser piece, right? As long as it's, 8.5 can be teased under a field goal, the Cincinnati Bengals were a viable teaser bet, especially since we don't know for sure if Tyler Huntley plays. And as we saw last week from these teams meeting each other, we know where the line's going to go if it's Anthony Brown. Maybe not necessarily as high because, Mark Andrews didn't play in that game. J.K. Dobbins didn't play in that game. But I think those two and that sort of concept is the key element on all of this. The Ravens punted that game last week. So nothing from that game in a sort of negative way, should be reflected against the Ravens, right? You can't go to that game and be like, well, look at what happened last week. Honestly, you could be positive about it and be like, they kind of hung around it, especially from a point spread standpoint, in a game that was started by Anthony Brown. That didn't have Mark Andrews. That didn't have, full complement of the running game. But the bigger issue here for me is the defense of the Ravens. They just signed Roquan Smith to this extension. It's because they like what they see out of this defense with Roquan Smith in the mix, right? Smith comes in, they move some guys around. Patrick Queen is playing in a different position. And the defense for the Ravens that at the start of the year was getting burned deep, left, right, and center, is all of a sudden getting to the quarterback, etc. We talked last week, or actually it was 2 weeks ago before the ill-fated Bengals Bills game, but how we're worried about the Bengals because they've lost right tackle La'el Collins. Then last week, they went and they lost another offensive lineman. Now they're without their right guard and their right tackle, going against this Ravens defense. That, by the way, from a cultural standpoint, right? We sort of talked about, a little bit about culture here and there, but from a cultural standpoint, like the Ravens are that team that is going to fist fight you, that is going to not lose by two scores in a playoff game, because they're going to do the things on special teams, even if the metrics don't necessarily look great for their special teams this season, right? How is it going to feel laying 9 points when all it takes is kind of one Mark Andrews 25-yard catch or a J.K. Dobbins 30-yard run or something along those lines to get into field goal range for Justin Tucker? Meanwhile, Evan McPherson hasn't been that great this season, hasn't been particularly great at all. And so you got Joe Burrow trying to drop back to pass when half of his line is getting caved in by the Ravens defense. And honestly, a defensive scheme that will likely try to be more aggressive, try to turn the Bengals over because they know they kind of have to. Now, could that go in the exact wrong way and the Bengals could score big touchdowns? I suppose, obviously, that it could. But they're going to need to have time. Joe Burrow's going to need to have time in the pocket to be able to execute those sort of longer type of plays, deep passes to Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, etc. Do I think they're going to do that without Alex Kappa and without Lael Collins? Like we talked about the Bengals as a team who their whole thing was we need to revamp the offensive line. Well, half of that is they're going, right?
Yeah.
Like those guys are gone. And so now we're looking at this team going, okay, well, it's back to the backup offensive line. Not great. Right. And so I think the Bengals still probably win this game. And I'm comfortable having given out a basically pick 'em teaser leg because that's aged really well. And now that we're up to 9, right, a teaser piece is -3. We don't want anything to do with that. But now we're up to 9. We might get to 10. And honestly, I'd be fine at +8.5 because this is that game, right? There's always one, right? And what's the game that's going to get us, in trouble, right? Is it going to be the Geno Smith on the road against the 49ers, like a way more talented team against a team that we didn't think was very good at the start of the season, played pretty well in the middle to start the season, and then honestly didn't play very well at the back end? No, probably not going to be that. It's going to be Skylar Thompson on the road against a Bills team that's been a, perennial sort of Super Bowl contender the last couple of weeks. Doesn't feel like it's going to be that. Now, I realize the Bengals went to the Super Bowl last year, but is it going to be the Ravens who basically spent a decade doing this to the Patriots and whatever? And you'd be like, well, they had Joe Flacco as their quarterback. So? Who's Joe Flacco? You know what I mean? Joe Flacco, the Ravens made Joe Flacco under the same concept of all he would do is just throw it deep 5 times a game and it would somehow work out. And the defense and special teams held up outside of that. So, yeah, we're getting way out of control here with this number. This is a spot where I'm a little bit worried about the teaser leg now because I think the Ravens have a chance with Dobbins and with Andrews and Huntley. Again, I have to assume Huntley's playing, but honestly, even if Anthony Brown's playing and this goes to 10.5, I love that too. So, yeah, this is Ravens underdog, have to. Never since, again, they might cover, they might blow them out. Never Cincinnati -8.5.
I got you. And it's the interesting move of not liking the line of 8.5 at all. It's just such a weird number. And that's the funny part of as we go through these playoff games. I enjoy looking through and seeing wait, that kind of seems off, and then starting the conversation there. Yeah. And this line, I will say, the last game of the week, Super Wild Card Weekend, which takes us to Monday night, which still seems a little weird to me. Can't lie. But Monday night playoff game, we got the Cowboys as 2.5-point favorites in Tampa Bay against the Bucs. Both of these teams, much like when I was discussing the Giants and the Vikings, very frustrating teams to bet on or against in terms of the Cowboys and the Bucs at different points throughout this season. But for whatever reason, I feel like the Dallas Cowboys, at least, I feel like I saw them be good at certain points this season. The Bucs, listen, I know, I get it. The Bucs, they're just trying to get to the playoffs. Tom Brady did his thing. He made sure he won games in spite of everything else around him going on. I don't know. I just have a tough time with the Bucs at this point, and I'll be the loser taking the Cowboys with all the sad Cowboy fan faces that we will see, and Michael Irvin getting clowned by Stephen A. Smith on Tuesday morning and all that fun stuff. I just can't with the Bucs. The Bucs this whole season, I felt like it was smoke and mirrors and Tom Brady somehow coming out and just winning a game.
Yeah.
And with this number being 2.5, not 3, I can still take the Cowboys.
Yeah.
At 3, then I'm leaning Tampa Bay. At 2.5, give me the Cowboys. I'll lay those points.
So this all comes down to context, right? And that's what we're doing here. This is a market. We're buying, we're selling, right? We're rating teams. We're changing ratings. We're seeing how the market's rating them. We're agreeing, disagreeing, et cetera, right? And nobody has been louder. And honestly, nobody was earlier to being loud about the Buccaneers being awful or average or whatever you want than I was. I think that's fair to say, right? Like I've been on that train for a very long time, right? And so contextually, when like, let's think about the game, when they hosted the Rams, for example, right? And it's like, how are they 3.5 against the Rams? Like this, should be 3, and it goes down to 3, and you go, okay, like that, we're getting closer here, but this like should be pick 'em, and yada yada yada. Bunch of other games follow a similar example. Road 7 against the Cardinals, even with I've already forgotten who the jabroni was who started that game. If the Bucs were rated the same way that they were rated when we complained about their rating, this would be like Bucs 2.5, Bucs -3. I mean, think about the start of the year, right? Week 1, Sunday Night Football, right? Speaking of things that feel like they happened a long time ago, 18 weeks ago. Tampa Bay was 6.5 on the road to Dallas. Yeah. So like we've come a long way. That's 9 points without even talking about home field advantage, right? Throw in another, 2 + 2 is 4, We're talking like 12, 13 point swing from where we were on the Bucs at the start of the season. So when I tell you I couldn't have grabbed the Bucs +3 fast enough when it opened at +3. And I basically sat there watching the Cowboys play the Commanders as I had a sneaking suspicion that the Cowboys were going to choke that game, because the Cowboys ill-prepared for a game, listen, any game, playoff, Thanksgiving, meaningless or whatever, easy game against the Texans or the Colts. Like you mentioned, like I'm still waiting for the Bucs to show you anything. I'm still waiting for the Cowboys to show you anything. Speaking of things that I was early on, pointing out all of these games that they just got by: Giants, Colts, listen, Giants are pretty good, but Colts, Texans, right? Every week it was like, am I the only one worried about this Cowboys team as they continually to be rated next to the Eagles, next to the 49ers in the betting market? Now you can say, well, listen, they played the Eagles too closely and yada, yada, yada. The Gardner Minshew Eagles, not the same thing as the Jalen Hurts Eagles, right? And they needed what 3rd and 13s and 4th downs.
Oh, it's crazy.
3rd and 30s and stuff like that, right? They need a lot of stuff to go right to win that game, let alone cover that game in kind of a fluky type of a way. So all that is to say, like, the Cowboys are the Bucs, only we haven't got there yet with the adjustment to the rating in the way that we moved the Bucs this whole time. And the Cowboys rating is like around, maybe it's a tiny bit higher than it was in week 1, but like we went a long way because Dak was out and we thought the Cowboys were terrible, and then they won a bunch of games when they came back. But again, like the Eagles, like everybody else in that division, the Giants, etc., like the Cowboys' schedule hasn't been particularly difficult, right? But they keep getting by because they win these games barely against these bad teams. And now they're favored on the road. I'm watching that Commanders game and I go, I dare sportsbooks to give me Bucs +3.5. Like I'm sitting there just going, I dare you to lay to put down a 3.5. They didn't. I had to think about it for a second. And then I thought to myself, you know what, Self? You're never getting 3.5. Just grab the 3 when you can. That went away in about 24 hours, maybe even a little bit less. So yeah, hard for me to be like, yeah, Tampa +2.5. I'd rather just do the money line here, because like if it comes down to it, man, who do you trust more, Tom or Dak, to lead that last drive?
Totally.
Right. And like, yeah, the Bucs season has been a bummer, but there's been a lot of parts in and out, right? The receiving core in and out. Obviously, Godwin trying to get back to healthy. He's finally healthy. They finally have Evans and Godwin sort of ready to go here. The defense, Vita Vea should be back this week, right? That's obviously a major thing for the run defense. There's going to be a lot of Zeke Elliott just running straight into that line and people getting bummed out because he's got 12 carries. And why don't we give it to Tony Pollard? And then Tony Pollard's going to come in and he's going to miss a block. And Dak's going to throw a panic interception or get strip sacked on a fumble, because the Buccaneers now have their secondary all back and healthy and ready to go. And Dak's 12 games and he led the league in interceptions. Like, if that guy's name was Davis Mills, who he tied with, by the way, for the league lead in interceptions, we'd be mocking the, old crappy Davis Mills, right? Skylar Thompson, this guy, that guy. Like, how about don't throw 14 interceptions in 12 games and I can have some faith in you? So, like, why am I supposed to like the Cowboys on the road in a playoff game after they lost as a favorite at home last year and they haven't shown anything against a good team basically all season long? No. Like this, I cannot, there's just not a way in which this makes sense to me. Like, the line makes sense. Like, I mark it with 3, so I was totally fine with it being 3. My numbers make it 2, so I'm not far off where it is. But eventually you just have to sit back and go, like, what on Monday night, when the fourth quarter rolls around, what do I think is going to happen here? You know what I mean? And, like, give me Brady. Now we're at 2.5. Teaser leg up plus 8.5. You can use, can't really anymore now that it's kind of getting to 9 here. Can't really use Cincinnati if that's gone. Jacksonville now plus 2 going up to 8, or plus 2.5 going up to 8.5. That's your first leg of this teaser. And then honestly, you might be able to tease this with some games for next week because it's a Monday night game. You tease that up with something that's already built, because this 4-5 game, we're going to know the other matchups in the NFL, right? We're going to know the other in the NFL divisional round. So you can tease it up.
I like it a lot. And the Dallas Cowboys Bucs game, like, that is just primed for, this is why ESPN, ABC, Disney wanted this Monday night playoff game. Dallas Cowboys versus Tom Brady, Monday Night Football, Troy Aikman, Joe Buck. Oh, it's going to be incredible scenes for sure. Obviously, though, there's a lot of other ways that people can be, watching these games, enjoying these games. And as we wrap up the pod here, though, I would like you to just give me what might be, well, first off, where the people can find the information to get a deeper dive into all of this. But just give me a prop. Give me something that, someone should look to and say, hey, if there's something, you might want to find another interesting way to kind of jump onto a wave here.
Yeah.
First off, give me the plug where I can find all this information.
Yeah, at MRS Authentic, that's the Twitter feed. Obviously, at the Score, set your alerts, your betting alerts for all the content. We got a bunch of all 6 games. We're going to be doing prop stuff for those. We're going to have a fun round robin parlay. You'll notice I didn't use the term money line. We're going to have a fun round robin parlay out on Friday for that as well. People ask me all the time, start of the playoffs, what, futures bets, like, who do you like in the Super Bowl? It's far too late, man. You missed out on all the good future plays and whatever. Like, these are things that, like, maybe you can get a good one in like week 12. I think Chargers, for example, were a decent one at the high prices that they were at. So, sorry, there's no value left. Last year, I know we had sort of a fun run with the 49ers. There's no 49ers-esque type of a run here because, listen, the best teams in the wild card round on the road are the Chargers. They're already a favorite. And the Cowboys, they're already a favorite. And I don't really like either team all that much, certainly at the prices they're at now or even at their rollover prices. But what I do have, super bonus content for you. Grab a pen and pencil. If you haven't already, hit pause. Here we go. There are certain books out there, most of them actually, who have markets for most passing yards for the playoffs, most receiving yards for the playoffs, and most rushing yards for the playoffs. Now, the key in all of this is, guess what? If you play a lot of games, you're gonna get a lot of yards. So you got a lot of teams playing this week that if they just make it to the conference finals, don't even have to win the conference finals because you still get credit, right? You make it to the conference finals and you lose, and I bet you to win the conference finals doesn't help you all that much. If you make it to the conference finals and I've got you for most passing yards, and you lose, maybe you threw 400 yards in a losing cause. All of that stuff counts. Last year, we had the Bengals and the Rams. Both teams played 4 games getting to the Super Bowl. So obviously, every single one of them led, each category was led by one of those 2 players. So not going to be a ton from the Eagles or the Chiefs because you literally need them to make the Super Bowl in order to even have a chance to even, you make the Super Bowl. They get 3 games. Right? That's the same as a team that lost in the conference championship game. So here we go. Most passing yards. First one, again, this is all about value, right? Justin Herbert is 11-1 to have the most passing yards. We know the Chargers run game is pretty bad. They're going to throw short. They're going to throw long. Listen, they're a favorite in the first round. Again, small favorite, admittedly. Then they go to the Chiefs next week, unless something really wacky happens, i.e. the Ravens beat the Bengals. Then they go to the Chiefs. Obviously, have had close games with the Chiefs in the past. If they can win that game, then they get to the conference finals. There's your 3 games that you need out of Justin Herbert. And maybe, honestly, they win that game too, and they go to the Super Bowl, in which case going to be really hard to beat Justin Herbert over 4 games in the passing yards section. Gentleman that we just mentioned, Thomas J. Brady. I think it had the most ever attempts. I think he had the most ever completions in his career. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. We're not handing the ball off to Leonard Fournette 20 times or Rachaad White. He's actually available at a certain website, our favorite website, Schmiv, as a bonus. But most of the places he's 11-1. You can get him for 14-1 there. So we're going to spread one on the NFC, one on the AFC there. Again, just need them to get to the third round, obviously the conference championship game, to have a real chance at cashing those. Rushing yards. The favorite is Christian McCaffrey. He's at plus 450. Not something I would normally like to do, but guess what? I like your 49ers going a long way here, Shell. McCaffrey at plus 450, I think, is actually still a pretty good price for a guy who could play 4 games and will get a ton of rushing yards. The Elijah Mitchell thing scares me a little bit, but I don't think that's going to matter all that much to McCaffrey's total yardage when it all is said and done, especially if he can play those 4 games. And then 2 long shots in the rushing category. Saquon Barkley, we like him plus 3. Maybe they can win. Then you've got the Eagles. Listen, Eagles' run defense was up and down this season. Who's to say the Giants couldn't beat the Eagles next week? Saquon Barkley's 30-1 to win the postseason rushing title, if you will. And if you want to go even a little bit wilder there, what's a team that's playing this week who everybody seems to like, who could make the Super Bowl or win the Super Bowl? The Buffalo Bills. James Cook is 33-1, whereas his backfield mate, Devin Singletary, is like 14-1. Last week, James Cook had more carries and more snaps than Devin Singletary, and he has taken more of the carries over the course of the season. He's a guy who could play 4 games. That would make up for some of these other guys who are going to get more in 1 game or 2 games. Really nice little underdog long shot there. Quickly, most receiving yards, Kelsey. He's available in at that same website, bonus boost, if you will. 10-1 in a lot of places. He's available at 12-1. He was 3rd last year in receiving yards. How many games, quickly, did Travis Kelsey play in the playoffs last year?
3.
Was he playing?
2.
2, right? Because they went. No, you're right. It was 3. It was 3. He was 3rd, and the 2 guys ahead of him played 4 games. Right. So like of the guys who played 3 games, he was the leader. So he could play 3 games this year. 12-1. I'll take it. I like your guy, George Kittle. If the 49ers are playing 4 games, if he averages 75 yards, now we're talking 300 yards, right? Tough to beat 300 yards in this category. And then a couple of long shots here. Godwin for the Tampa Bay, right? If we like Tom Brady, let's try Godwin. He's at quickly 35-1. And then T. Higgins and Juju Smith-Schuster. Juju Smith-Schuster, again, another guy who could play 3 full games here and be the main guy for Kansas City in the playoffs. We're talking about 20-1 for him. And T. Higgins, he's 20-1 as well. If more focus is put on Jamar Chase and Cincinnati gets back to the Super Bowl, 20-1, T. Higgins is going to be very live to lead the league in receiving yards in the postseason. And one last one, Super Bowl MVP. Your man, George Kittle, is 100-1 right now. The 49ers get to the Super Bowl. I don't know that it's necessarily fait accompli that Brock Purdy wins the MVP, as a quarterback often does, right? He's obviously shown a connection with Kittle. Maybe there's a 100-yard, 2-touchdown game in the Super Bowl for George Kittle. At 100-1, that's worth a few bucks to see what happens in the playoffs. Obviously, I'm high on the 49ers making the Super Bowl, but from a market standpoint, there's no bet to make on the team, but plenty of bets to make on the players.
Love it, my dude. And again, that is, you can follow Matt at MRussAuthentic, and of course, all the stuff he writes at The Score as well. And we're here. It's playoff time. We're wilding out here with a bunch of bets, different props, lots of stuff going on. Make sure you like and follow and subscribe wherever you get the podcast. Make sure you're following Matt. Make sure you're tapping in. Bless us with the likes and retweets, and ask questions throughout the weekend, because Matt's live tweeting the games going on and celebrating and commiserating, as he likes to say. So make sure you follow along at Twitter for sure. My name is Sheldon Alexander. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Shell Alexander on Twitter, Sheldon Alexander on Instagram. As mentioned again, this is the On Blast podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your pods. For watching this video and you haven't hit like already, you made it this far through, you haven't hit like, first off, what are you doing? But also, thank you for watching either way. Because as I always say, I used to pray for times like this, to rhyme like this. This is the On Blast podcast, NFL Picks Edition, part of the On Blast podcast network. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.